Imagine being a rural schoolteacher who invents something so revolutionary that it transforms not only an industry, but the outcome of an entire world war. In 1911, an American inventor from Ohio named Charles Kettering created a machine that all experts said was impossible. Engineers laughed at him. Manufacturers rejected him. But his invention became so essential that it forever changed how we live and how wars are fought. This is the story of how one determined man built the electric starter, revolutionized the automobile industry, and then created technologies that helped win World War II. Stay until the end, because the most incredible part comes in the final chapters. August 29, 1876, a small farm outside Loudonville, Ohio. This is where Charles Franklin Kettering entered the world, the fourth of 5 children born to Jacob and Martha Kettering. His father worked the land with calloused hands. His mother ran the household with strict discipline. Nothing about young Charlie suggested he would one day hold 186 patents and revolutionize both the automobile industry and military warfare. Life on the Kettering farm was simple, repetitive and demanding. Wake before dawn, feed the animals, work the fields, sleep, repeat. Charlie's older brothers, David and Adam, accepted this rhythm without question. They would grow up to be a farmer and a handyman. Ordinary lives for ordinary times. But Charlie was different. While his hands worked the plow, his mind wandered to mechanisms, to how things worked, to what could be improved. He showed early signs of mechanical curiosity. When farm equipment broke, young Charlie didn't just want it fixed. He wanted to understand why it failed. He took apart tools and studied their inner workings with an intensity that puzzled his parents. But curiosity alone doesn't build careers. Charlie needed education, and that's where his struggles truly began. After finishing high school, Kettering took a teaching position at a one-room schoolhouse. It paid the bills, but it wasn't his calling. He dreamed of engineering, of creating, of building things that mattered. So he enrolled at the College of Worcester, determined to pursue his passion. But fate had other plans. His eyes began to fail him. The strain of reading, of studying under dim lamplight, became unbearable. Headaches plagued him. His vision blurred. Doctors offered no solutions. Kettering was forced to withdraw from college and return to teaching, watching his engineering dreams slip away like sand through his fingers. For 2 years, he taught children their letters and numbers while his own education remained on hold. Many young men would have accepted defeat at this point. The world had spoken. Farming or teaching, those were his options. But Kettering possessed something that transcends talent, something that outweighs natural ability. He had determination that bordered on stubbornness. When his eyes improved slightly, he tried again. This time, he enrolled at the Ohio State University to study electrical engineering. And once again, his eyes betrayed him. The strain returned. The headaches came back. He withdrew once more, this time taking a job with the telephone line crew, installing wires across the Ohio countryside. Picture him there, a young man in his 20s, stringing telephone cables between poles, watching other men his age graduate from university, start careers, build futures. The rejection must have stung. The self-doubt must have whispered in his ear during those long days on the line crew. Maybe you're not meant for this. Maybe you should accept your limitations. But here's what separates the innovators from the dreamers. Kettering didn't listen to that voice. When his eyes improved again, he returned to Ohio State for a 3rd time. And this time, despite the continued eye problems, despite the headaches, despite the odds, he pushed through. He would study by lamplight until his eyes screamed for mercy, then rest them and return to his books. Failure after failure had taught him resilience. In 1904, at age 28, Charles Kettering finally graduated with his degree in electrical engineering. It had taken him longer than most. He had failed more times than most. But he had something his classmates didn't. He had learned how to fail and keep moving forward. And that lesson would prove more valuable than any grade or diploma. The rejected farm boy who couldn't see was about to change the world. Fresh out of Ohio State with his hard-won electrical engineering degree, Kettering needed a job. Not just any job, but one that would let him create, invent, and solve problems. He found that opportunity at the National Cash Register Company in Dayton, Ohio, one of the most innovative companies of the era. NCR didn't just hire him. They gave him the title Electrical Inventor and told him to revolutionize their product line. Think about that for a moment. A company gave a 28-year-old recent graduate the explicit job title of inventor. They didn't want him to maintain existing products or make minor improvements. They wanted disruption. They wanted innovation, and Kettering was about to deliver beyond their wildest expectations. At the time, NCR's cash registers were purely mechanical devices. Every sale required a clerk to turn a heavy hand crank, a physical process that was slow, tiring, and limited in functionality. Kettering saw this as an engineering problem begging for an electrical solution. But he didn't just want to electrify the existing design. He wanted to reimagine what a cash register could do. His first major innovation addressed a problem retailers faced daily: credit approval. In 1906, there was no electronic payment system. If a customer wanted to buy something on credit, a store clerk would have to physically walk to a central office, ask for approval, wait for a manager to check records, then walk back to inform the customer. This process could take 15 minutes or more. Customers got frustrated. Sales were lost. Money was left on the table. Kettering created a system that coupled existing telephones at sales counters to solenoid-operated stamping machines. A clerk could now request credit approval electronically, and a central office could approve it with the push of a button. The stamp would print the approval right at the sales counter. What once took 15 minutes now took 15 seconds. It was a precursor to modern credit card systems, invented decades before anyone had conceived of plastic payment cards. But Kettering wasn't done. His next project tackled restaurant billing, which presented unique challenges. Restaurants needed to track multiple categories, like food, beverages, and tobacco products. They needed to add items throughout a meal, subtract items that were returned, and produce duplicate receipts. The mechanical cash registers of the day couldn't handle such complexity. Working with his team, Kettering designed an electrical cash register system that could do all of this and more. It combined a printer for duplicate receipts, the ability to divide totals into subcategories, and even subtraction capability for returns and corrections. NCR introduced this system commercially in 1908. And it became an instant success in the restaurant industry. During his 5 years at NCR, from 1904 to 1909, Kettering secured 23 patents for the company. Each one solved a real problem. Each one made business operations faster, easier, or more reliable. He later explained his success simply: "I didn't hang around much with other inventors and the executive fellows. I lived with the sales gang. They had some real notion of what people wanted." This philosophy would define Kettering's entire career. He didn't invent for the sake of inventing. He didn't create clever solutions to problems that didn't exist. He listened to the people who used the products, understood their pain points, and built solutions that made their lives better. It was practical innovation driven by real-world needs, but even as his success at NCR grew, Kettering's attention was turning toward a newer, more exciting technology that was just beginning to transform American life. On the streets of Dayton, automobiles were becoming more common, and they had problems. Serious, life-threatening problems. Kettering was about to solve one of the deadliest. In the early 1900s, owning an automobile meant living with a dark reality. Starting your car could kill you. Every single automobile of the era required hand cranking to start the engine. You would insert a heavy metal crank into the front of the vehicle, position yourself carefully, and then rotate it with considerable force. When the engine caught, that crank would often kick back violently. Broken arms were common. Broken jaws were frequent. Deaths happened regularly. The situation was more than inconvenient. It was a genuine barrier to automobile adoption. Many people, particularly women, refused to drive because of the dangerous starting procedure. The automobile industry had a serious problem, and nobody seemed to have a solution. Electric starters had been tried before, but they required massive batteries and still weren't reliable enough for daily use. Most engineers had simply accepted that hand cranking was a necessary evil, but in 1907, Kettering and his colleague Edward Deeds from NCR started spending their evenings and weekends in Deeds' barn, working on automobile improvements. They began with the ignition system. American cars of the time used non-rechargeable dry cell batteries that had to be replaced every few hundred miles. Kettering adapted technology from his cash register work, creating a magnetic relay that produced a single spark instead of a shower, dramatically reducing battery drain and extending battery life. This innovation led to the founding of the Dayton Engineering Laboratories Company, or Delco, in 1909. Cadillac immediately ordered 8,000 units of their improved ignition system. Kettering left his comfortable position at NCR to devote himself full-time to Delco and automotive innovation. He was now 33 years old, married with a young son, leaving job security to bet on his own inventions. It was a risk, but Kettering had learned long ago that playing it safe meant accepting limitations. The ignition system was just the beginning. Kettering's real target was the deadly hand crank, and he approached it with the same systematic thinking that had served him at NCR. From the very start, he didn't envision just an electric starter. He conceived of a complete integrated electrical system for starting, ignition, and lighting. One system, one solution, multiple problems solved. The engineering challenges were enormous. The motor needed to provide substantial torque for a brief starting period, then operate at a different ratio when the car was running. He had to develop a system that could switch between these modes automatically, and it all had to be powered by a rechargeable battery that the system itself would recharge while driving. Kettering borrowed a concept from his cash register work, a motor capable of producing a significant burst of power for brief periods. He switched from dry cells to storage batteries. He designed the motor to serve double duty, acting as a generator to recharge the battery when the engine was running. He worked out gear ratios that would provide high torque during starting, but operate efficiently during normal running. By 1911, he had a working prototype. In 1912, Cadillac became the first automobile manufacturer to offer the electric starter as standard equipment. The impact was immediate and revolutionary. Women could now start cars safely. Elderly drivers were no longer at risk. The automobile industry experienced a surge in sales because the single biggest barrier to adoption had been eliminated. Kettering's electric starter saved countless lives and injuries. It opened automobile ownership to millions who had been excluded by physical limitations or safety concerns. It was one of the most important automotive innovations in history. And yet, it was just the beginning of what Charles Kettering would contribute to. Transportation and warfare. The man who couldn't get through college was now changing the world. April 1917. The United States had just entered World War I. And the military was desperate for technological advantages. Aviation was barely a decade old. The Wright brothers' first flight had occurred just 14 years earlier, and now airplanes were dogfighting over European battlefields. But aircraft were expensive, pilots were scarce, and training took months. The U.S. Army Aircraft Board needed something different, something revolutionary. They turned to Charles Kettering with an audacious request: design an unmanned flying bomb that could hit targets 40 miles away. An aircraft with no pilot, a weapon that could be built cheaply, launch toward enemy positions, and deliver a devastating payload without risking American lives. In 1917, this concept existed only in imagination. But the army believed that if anyone could turn imagination into reality, it was the man who had revolutionized automobiles. Kettering accepted the challenge immediately. He assembled his team, which included none other than Orville Wright himself as the aeronautical consultant. Think about that collaboration. The man who invented the airplane and the man who invented the electric starter working together to create something the world had never seen. The guidance system would be designed by Elmer Ambrose Sperry, another brilliant engineer. This wasn't just a good team. This was an all-star lineup of American innovation. What they created became known as the Kettering aerial torpedo, though everyone called it the Bug. And it was unlike anything in existence. The Bug was a small biplane with a wingspan of nearly 15 feet and a length of just 12 feet. But here's what made it remarkable. To keep costs down and production fast, Kettering built the wings from cardboard and the fuselage from papier-mâché reinforced with wood laminates. At just $400 per unit, it could be mass-produced at a fraction of the cost of a manned aircraft. But cheap construction didn't mean simple technology. The Bug was packed with innovations that wouldn't become common for decades. It launched from a four-wheeled dolly that rolled down a portable track, much like modern aircraft carrier catapults. Once airborne, the dolly would detach and fall away. A 40-horsepower De Palma engine would propel the Bug at 50 miles per hour toward its target, carrying 300 pounds of explosives equal to the aircraft's own weight. The guidance system was the true marvel. A small gyroscope kept the Bug's heading true, maintaining its course automatically. An aneroid barometer, so sensitive it could detect the change in air pressure between a desktop and the floor, controlled elevation. This kept the Bug at a preset cruising altitude without any human intervention. It was autopilot decades before commercial autopilots would exist. The targeting system used elegant mechanical simplicity. Before launch, operators would calculate three factors: wind direction, wind speed, and actual distance to the target. Using these numbers, they would determine how many engine revolutions were needed to reach the destination. A cam would be set to count these revolutions. When the engine reached that precise count, the cam would drop, shutting off the engine and releasing the Bug's wings. The torpedo-shaped fuselage, loaded with 300 pounds of explosives, would then plunge into the target. It was a cruise missile. In 1917, guided by mechanical computers and preset calculations, Kettering had created a weapon that combined aviation, automation, and explosive delivery in a way that anticipated modern warfare by decades. The Bug represented a fundamental shift in military thinking, the ability to project lethal force without risking pilots' lives. The Dayton Wright Airplane Company, which Kettering had co-founded with Deeds and other investors, including Orville Wright, began production. About 45 Bugs were built. Test flights were scheduled. The military was eager to see if this revolutionary weapon would work as promised. But reality, as it often does, had other plans. October 2nd, 1918, Dayton, Ohio, military brass, government officials, and Kettering's team gathered to witness the first test flight of the Bug. The tension was palpable. Years of work, significant military funding, and the hope of a revolutionary weapon all converged on this single moment. The Bug sat on its launch dolly, its cardboard wings catching the morning light, its explosive payload replaced with ballast for safety. Everything was ready. The engine roared to life. The dolly began rolling down the track, picking up speed. The Bug lifted off successfully, and then, in front of everyone, disaster struck. Instead of maintaining horizontal flight, the Bug's nose pitched upward dramatically. It climbed too steeply, the angle becoming more extreme with each passing second. Then inevitably it stalled. The Bug hung in the air for a heartbeat, before falling back to earth and crashing into the ground in a twisted mess of cardboard and wood. General Hap Arnold, one of the military observers, later described the scene. After the crash, He and other generals found themselves running for cover as subsequent test flights became equally unpredictable. The Bug's guidance system, so carefully designed, seemed to have a mind of its own. One test saw the Bug veer off course and chase the distinguished observers across the field. It was equal parts terrifying and absurd. Imagine senior military officials scattering like schoolchildren while an unmanned aircraft, bearing their hoped-for superweapon, careens wildly overhead. But Kettering didn't quit. He never quit. He and his team analyzed the failure, adjusted the controls, refined the guidance system, and tried again. Subsequent flights showed improvement. Some were actually successful, achieving their programmed flight paths and hitting their targets. The Bug demonstrated to Army personnel at Dayton that the concept could work. Out of 6 attempts in Dayton, 2 were successful. Tests at Amityville yielded 1 success out of 4 attempts. At Carlstrom Field in Florida, 4 out of 14 flights hit their marks. One test at Carlstrom became legendary. The Bug launched successfully, climbed to altitude, and then simply vanished from sight. As the team watched it disappear into the clouds, Kettering reportedly said, "Leave the thing up there." But his crew insisted on finding it, and they did, 21 miles from the launch point. The Bug had flown farther than designed, proving the concept could exceed expectations when everything worked correctly. Yet despite these successes, despite proving the technology could function, the military remained deeply skeptical. Their concerns were legitimate. The Bug's success rate hovered around 30%. For every successful flight, there were 2 failures. And unlike traditional artillery or manned aircraft, the Bug couldn't adjust course after launch. If the wind calculations were slightly off, if weather conditions changed, if any of the mechanical systems failed, the Bug would miss its target. Or worse, it might crash among friendly troops. Military officials worried specifically about reliability when carrying explosives over Allied positions. The thought of an unmanned aircraft loaded with 300 pounds of explosives veering off course and crashing into American or Allied troops was a nightmare scenario. They couldn't trust it. They wouldn't deploy it. By the time the war ended in November 1918, about 45 Bugs had been produced, but not a single one had been used in combat. Kettering's revolutionary weapon, the world's first cruise missile, never fired a shot in anger. The military's official stance was that the technology was promising but premature. They thanked Kettering for his service, filed the Bug project away, and moved on. But they didn't destroy the Bugs. They didn't dismantle the technology. Instead, they did something stranger. They classified everything about the project and kept it secret. The Kettering Bug became one of World War I's hidden stories, a weapon that worked but was never used, an innovation ahead of its time, and then for 20 years, it disappeared. Through the 1920s and 1930s, the Kettering Bug became a ghost. Most Americans had no idea it had ever existed. The military kept all details classified. No newspaper articles appeared. No magazine stories celebrated Kettering's achievement. In an era before modern security clearances and official secrecy, this represents a remarkable feat of information control. The Bug had been buried, intentionally hidden from public knowledge and historical record. But here's what the official story doesn't mention. The Army didn't entirely abandon the Bug. Throughout the 1920s, what had become the U.S. Army Air Service continued to experiment with the unmanned aircraft. Behind closed doors, at remote testing facilities, engineers and military planners kept working on the technology. They refined the guidance systems. They tested new materials. They explored different engine configurations. The research was sporadic, underfunded, and often interrupted, but it never completely stopped. Then the funding dried up entirely. The Great Depression hit, and military budgets were slashed. Research into experimental weapon systems became a luxury the Army couldn't afford. The Bug project was officially terminated. The remaining aircraft were stored away. The documentation was filed in military archives. The knowledge remained locked away, waiting. Meanwhile, Charles Kettering moved on to his next chapters. He had sold Delco to General Motors in 1916, and in 1920 he became Vice President and Director of Research for GM, a position he would hold for 27 years. His work there was extraordinary. He directed development of variable speed transmissions, four-wheel brakes, safety glass, quick-drying automotive paints, and countless other improvements that shaped the modern automobile. He also developed, with chemist Thomas Migley Jr., tetraethyl lead as a gasoline additive to prevent engine knock. And he helped create Freon, a refrigerant that revolutionized cooling systems. These inventions made him wealthy and famous. By the 1930s, Kettering was a household name in America, celebrated as one of the nation's greatest living inventors. Time magazine featured him on its cover in 1933, but his work on the bug remained secret. When people asked Kettering about his contributions to World War I, he could mention his work on aircraft ignition systems and synthetic aircraft fuel. But the bug, that stayed classified. That stayed hidden. That became the achievement he couldn't discuss, the innovation he couldn't claim, the weapon that had been too far ahead of its time. Then came the late 1930s, and the world situation changed dramatically. Nazi Germany was rearming. Japan was expanding aggressively in Asia. The storm clouds of another global conflict were gathering, and this time, military planners knew it would be even more devastating than the Great War. Technology had advanced. Aircraft were faster. Bombs were bigger. The next war would be fought with weapons that didn't exist in 1918, except for one weapon, one concept, one technology that had existed all along, waiting in military archives for someone to remember its potential. Somewhere in Washington, in the late 1930s, military planners began pulling out old files from World War I. They reviewed experimental weapons programs. They analyzed what had worked and what had failed. And they found the Kettering Bug. By 1940, with war raging in Europe and America's entry looking increasingly inevitable, President Franklin Roosevelt established the National Inventors Council. Its purpose was to harness American innovation for the coming conflict. And who did Roosevelt appoint to lead this council? Charles Kettering, the man who had invented the bug 2 decades earlier. The man whose flying torpedo had been rejected, classified, and forgotten. The secret weapon was about to be revealed. And this time, the world was ready for it. While Charles Kettering led the National Inventors Council from 1940 onward, mobilizing American innovation for the war effort, something remarkable was happening in the background. Military engineers and weapons designers were revisiting old projects, looking for concepts that could be revived and improved with modern technology. The Kettering Bug kept appearing in those conversations. The technology had aged well. The fundamental concept of an unmanned aerial vehicle carrying an explosive payload to a preset target remained sound. What had been lacking in 1918, reliability and accuracy, could potentially be solved with the electronic advances of the 1940s. Better gyroscopes, more accurate barometric altimeters, improved engine reliability, radio guidance systems. All of these technologies had matured significantly in the intervening 2 decades. Military planners studying the bug recognized something that Kettering had understood all along. This weapon anticipated the future of warfare. The ability to strike targets without risking pilots' lives represented a fundamental strategic advantage. The low cost of production meant these weapons could be deployed in large numbers, overwhelming enemy defenses through sheer volume rather than precision. One bug might miss its target, but a swarm of bugs launched simultaneously could devastate an enemy position. The British had been thinking along similar lines. Facing German bombing campaigns and desperate for ways to strike back, British engineers developed their own unmanned weapons. The documents show that British radio-controlled weapons from 1917 had been kept secret during the interwar period. Just like the bug, now, with war escalating, both American and British programs were being declassified and shared between allies. This cross-pollination of ideas led directly to the development of several World War II weapons systems. The German V-1 flying bomb, which terrorized London in 1944, operated on principles remarkably similar to the Kettering Bug. Launch from a ramp, fly on a preset course, count engine revolutions or distance, cut the engine and dive into the target. The Germans had arrived at nearly identical solutions, possibly through their own research, or possibly through intelligence gathering about Allied experiments. American weapons designers, now fully aware of both the bug's history and German developments, created improved versions. The Interstate TDR-1, an assault drone used by the U.S. Navy in the Pacific Theater, combined the bug's concept with radio control technology. It could carry 2,000 pounds of explosives and be guided to its target by a controller in a mothership aircraft. It was the bug's descendant, improved with technologies that hadn't existed in Kettering's era. But the bug's most significant legacy wasn't any single weapon system. It was the concept itself. Kettering had proven back in 1917 that unmanned aircraft could work. The technology might have been premature, the execution might have been flawed, but the idea was sound. Every cruise missile, every military drone, every unmanned combat aerial vehicle that would follow, from World War II through the modern era, could trace its lineage back to that cardboard-winged biplane that crashed on its first test flight in Dayton. The military's decision to classify the bug rather than abandon it proved prescient. By keeping the research secret but preserved, they ensured that when technology caught up to Kettering's vision, the groundwork was already laid. The experiments had been run. The mistakes had been documented. The lessons had been learned. Future weapons designers didn't have to start from scratch. They could build on Kettering's foundation. In 1945, when World War II finally ended, the Kettering Bug's existence was finally declassified and revealed to the public. Newspaper articles celebrated Kettering's ahead-of-its-time invention. Military historians recognized the bug as a pioneering weapon system. And Charles Kettering, now 69 years old and still directing research at General Motors, could finally discuss the project that had remained secret for nearly 3 decades. The weapon that was too advanced for World War I had helped shape World War II. Being ahead of your time isn't always a blessing. Charles Kettering learned this lesson repeatedly throughout his career, but nowhere more dramatically than with the bug. When you create something the world isn't ready for, you face a unique form of frustration. You can see the potential, you understand the applications. But convincing others requires not just proving your invention works, but proving the world needs it now. The bug failed in World War I, not because the technology was fundamentally flawed. It failed because the surrounding ecosystem, the supporting technologies, the operational doctrines, the military mindset, none of it was ready for unmanned warfare. The military had barely figured out how to use manned aircraft effectively. Asking them to trust unmanned weapons was like asking someone who just learned to ride a bicycle to fly a helicopter. This pattern of premature innovation defined much of Kettering's career. Consider his diesel engine work at General Motors in the 1930s. He developed lightweight, high-speed two-stroke diesel engines that would eventually revolutionize the locomotive and heavy equipment industries. But when he first proposed them, the railroad industry was skeptical. Diesel wasn't proven. Steam locomotives worked fine. Why take the risk? Kettering persisted because he understood something crucial. Being right too early is still being right. Eventually the world catches up. Eventually the supporting technologies mature. Eventually the economic or strategic situation changes, and suddenly what seemed impossible becomes essential. His diesel engines eventually powered countless locomotives, ships, and generators. The technology was sound. The timing just had to align. The same held true for his work on anti-knock gasoline. When Kettering and Thomas Migley first proposed adding tetraethyl lead to gasoline to eliminate engine knock, critics questioned the safety, the cost, the necessity. But engine knock was limiting engine performance. Higher compression ratios which meant more power and efficiency, couldn't be achieved without solving the knock problem. Kettering's solution, though later recognized as environmentally problematic, solved an immediate engineering challenge and enabled the high-performance engines that powered mid-20th century automobiles. In every case, Kettering's approach was the same: identify a real problem, develop a practical solution, then persist until the world recognized its value. He famously said, "It doesn't matter if you try and try again and fail. It does matter if you try and fail to try again." This philosophy sustained him through repeated rejections, failed demonstrations, and skeptical audiences. But here's the deeper truth about the Bug story. Rejection doesn't mean failure. The Bug was rejected by the World War I military, but the technology lived on. The research continued. The lessons learned informed future innovations. And when circumstances changed, when another war demanded new solutions, that rejected weapon became the foundation for an entire class of military systems. This is the real lesson of Charles Kettering's story. Innovation isn't just about having good ideas. It's about persistence in the face of rejection. It's about believing in your vision when others can't see it. It's about understanding that being ahead of your time means you'll have to wait for your time to arrive. Kettering built his career on this understanding. From the farm boy who failed out of college twice, to the cash register inventor who revolutionized retail, to the automotive pioneer who made cars accessible to everyone, to the weapons designer who created a technology before the military knew what to do with it. Every step demonstrated the power of persistent innovation. The Bug wasn't his greatest invention. The electric starter probably saved more lives. His automotive innovations touched more people. But the Bug represents the purest expression of his innovative philosophy. Create what the world needs, even if the world doesn't know it yet. Then wait, because eventually, inevitably, the world catches up to good ideas. And when it does, the pioneers who persisted are remembered as visionaries. While the Kettering Bug's military legacy was being written in World War II weapon systems, Charles Kettering himself was focused on challenges far removed from warfare. By the 1940s, he had become one of America's most celebrated inventors, but his interests had expanded well beyond automobiles and aviation. He was thinking about energy, about health, about the fundamental problems facing humanity. One obsession dominated his later years: photosynthesis. Kettering became convinced that truly understanding how plants convert sunlight into energy would solve humanity's long-term energy crisis. He knew that fossil fuels, despite their abundance, would eventually run out. He wanted to unlock nature's solar power system, the process that had sustained life on Earth for billions of years. To pursue this research, he founded the Kettering Foundation at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. It was pure research, unlikely to produce immediate practical applications, but Kettering believed in investing in the future. His interest in medical applications of technology led to several remarkable innovations. He designed and built the Kettering hypotherm, a device that treated neurosyphilis by carefully heating the body to therapeutic temperatures. He developed an incubator for premature infants that dramatically improved their survival rates. His research into magnetism's applications in medicine laid groundwork for what would eventually become MRI technology. These weren't side projects or hobbies. They represented Kettering's fundamental belief that engineering could solve problems in any field. In 1944, tragedy struck. Kettering's sister died of cancer. The loss hit him deeply. He began researching cancer treatment with the same systematic approach he brought to automotive engineering. The following year, he and General Motors President Alfred Sloan founded what became the Sloan-Kettering Institute for Cancer Research at the Memorial Cancer Center in New York City. Their premise was revolutionary for its time. Apply industrial research techniques to medical problems. Use the same systematic experimentation, the same rigorous testing, the same iterative improvement that had revolutionized manufacturing. Then in 1946, Kettering's wife Olive died of pancreatic cancer. 2 cancer deaths in 2 years. The man who had solved so many engineering problems couldn't solve this one, but he could fund others to try. The Sloan Kettering Institute became his tribute to both his sister and his wife, a testament to the belief that no problem was unsolvable if enough intelligent people worked on it systematically enough. Kettering retired from General Motors in 1947 at age 71, but retirement for him meant more time for research, not less. He continued consulting for GM. He remained active in the Kettering Foundation's work on photosynthesis. He gave speeches about innovation, sharing his philosophy with audiences around the world. His talks were famous for their accessible language and practical wisdom. He didn't speak in technical jargon. He told stories. He shared failures as readily as successes. He made innovation seem achievable. One of his most famous quotes captures his entire approach to life. "My interest is in the future because I'm going to spend the rest of my life there." He wasn't interested in past glories. He didn't dwell on his 186 patents or his revolutionary inventions. He wanted to know what problems remained unsolved, what challenges still faced humanity, what innovations would shape tomorrow. His life contradicted his own advice about history. He said studying history was a waste of time, that you never get anywhere looking in your rearview mirror. Yet his own story became an inspiration precisely because it demonstrates timeless principles. Persistence matters. Practical solutions beat elegant theories. Listening to users beats talking to experts. Failure is education, not defeat. Innovation serves humanity, not ego. These lessons, learned over decades of invention and refinement, became Kettering's final gift to future innovators, Charles Franklin. Kettering died on November 25, 1958, at his home in Dayton, Ohio, after suffering a series of strokes. He was 82 years old. At the time of his death, he held 186 patents. He had founded or co-founded multiple companies that collectively employed thousands of people. His inventions had touched virtually every American's life, whether they knew his name or not. Think about your daily life for a moment. If you've ever started a car with a key or button instead of a dangerous hand crank, you have Kettering to thank. If you've ever benefited from diesel-powered transportation, from trains to ships to generators, his research made that possible. If you've used a modern cash register or credit card system, you're using technology descended from his retail innovations. If you've been treated at a hospital that uses advanced medical equipment, some of that technology traces back to his medical research funding. But perhaps his most important legacy isn't any single invention. It's the model he provided for how innovation actually works. Kettering demolished the myth of the lone genius having sudden breakthroughs. His career demonstrated that real innovation is systematic, iterative, and rooted in understanding real-world problems. He failed repeatedly, adjusted his approach, and tried again. He listened to users rather than experts. He focused on practical solutions rather than elegant theories. The Kettering Bug embodies this approach perfectly. It was rejected. It failed most of its tests. It never fired a shot in the war it was designed for. Yet it succeeded in the most important way. It proved a concept that would shape the future of warfare. Every military drone flying today, from reconnaissance UAVs to armed predators to long-range cruise missiles, descends from that cardboard-winged biplane that Kettering built in 1917. Military historians now recognize the Bug as the first practical cruise missile, the pioneer of unmanned aerial warfare. Museums display surviving Bug components as treasured artifacts. The Smithsonian Institution preserves documentation of the project. Military academies teach about it when discussing the evolution of aerial warfare. What was once classified and forgotten is now celebrated as visionary. This transformation from rejected failure to recognized triumph took decades. Kettering lived long enough to see the bug's declassification and recognition, but he never sought credit or complained about the decades of secrecy. He had moved on to other problems, other innovations, other ways to improve human life. The bug was just one project among hundreds, one attempt to solve a problem that needed solving. His approach to failure particularly resonates today. In our modern culture of instant success and viral breakthroughs, Kettering's story provides necessary perspective. He failed out of college twice. His first major military project was rejected. Many of his inventions required years of refinement before achieving commercial success. He faced skepticism, rejection, and outright failure repeatedly throughout his career. And yet he persisted, not through blind stubbornness, but through systematic analysis and adjustment. Modern Silicon Valley entrepreneurs often quote Kettering without knowing it. His philosophy of rapid prototyping, learning from failure, and iterating towards success has become the foundation of modern startup culture. His insistence on understanding user needs before designing solutions predates modern design thinking by decades. His belief that interdisciplinary teams produce better results than isolated specialists has become conventional wisdom in innovation circles. The institutions he founded continue his work. The Sloan Kettering Memorial Cancer Center remains one of the world's premier cancer research facilities. The Kettering Foundation continues to fund research into democracy, education, and civic engagement. General Motors' research divisions, though transformed over decades, still reflect the systematic approach to innovation that Kettering established. His legacy isn't just his patents. It's the infrastructure he built for continued innovation. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the automotive industry itself. When General Motors established its Kettering University in Flint, Michigan, they created an institution dedicated to practical, hands-on engineering education. Students there don't just study theory. They work in laboratories, build prototypes, solve real problems for real companies. They learn by doing, by failing, by adjusting, and by trying again. It's exactly how Kettering learned, exactly how he taught, exactly how he believed engineering should be practiced. Today, when we discuss innovation, we often focus on the successful outcome, the finished product, the revolutionary breakthrough. We forget the years of failure that preceded it. We ignore the rejected prototypes and failed demonstrations. We skip over the skepticism and doubt. Charles Kettering's story reminds us that these elements aren't obstacles to innovation. They are innovation. The path from idea to impact runs through repeated failure, persistent refinement, and eventual recognition. The farm boy who couldn't see well enough to finish college became one of America's most prolific inventors. The cash register designer became an automotive pioneer. The man whose flying torpedo was rejected built the foundation for modern unmanned warfare. At every stage, rejection and failure preceded success. At every stage, persistence and systematic problem-solving transformed setbacks into breakthroughs. This is the real story of the Kettering Bug, not the technical specifications or the test flights or the military applications. The real story is what it teaches us about innovation itself. Good ideas ahead of their time don't die. They wait, they evolve, they influence. And when the world finally catches up, when circumstances finally align, when supporting technologies finally mature, those ideas emerge from obscurity and change everything. Charles Kettering understood this deeply. He built his career on it. He lived it every day. And in the end, his greatest invention wasn't any particular device or system. It was a method for turning problems into solutions, failures into learning, and rejections into opportunities. That method, that approach, that persistence in the face of doubt, that is his true legacy. The Kettering Bug flew for less than a minute on its first test before crashing. But the idea behind it has been flying for over a century, and it shows no signs of landing. From the cardboard wings of 1918 to the sophisticated drones of today, the lineage is clear. The rejected inventor who wouldn't quit built something more permanent than any machine. He built the future. And the future eventually always arrives.